Welcome, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm kind of facilitating this discussion, but as our introduction has said there, we all have lived experience here on the panel of mental illness around the perinatal period. So the period from conception to a year after birth. And that's something that we're going to do today. We're going to tell our stories and share our experiences. But we also have a huge amount of knowledge and experience of what to do about improving the lives of people with mental illness in a workplace setting. So we're not just going to be sharing our experiences, we're also going to be giving you lots of ideas about how you can do that in your workplace. So my name is André. I'm here with Kelly and Erika and Chris. And as my introduction has said, I'm also called the mental elf. Do you get it? It's fun.
You do.
Mental elf, mental health. Good, yeah. And what I do with my website is I try and close the gap between research and practice. So in mental health, there's a 17-year gap between research and practice. So when a new piece of evidence is published in the academic literature, in a medical journal, it takes 17 years for that evidence to find its way to the front line and to actually get used by healthcare professionals. Which is a bit too long, isn't it? And these things haven't solved that problem. It's always been a 17-year gap the whole time I've worked in mental health. So we need to do something to change that, and that's what I try and do with blogs and with social media. So, perinatal mental health problems. We know that 1 in 5 women experience some kind of mental health difficulty in this perinatal period. And we know that about 12% of women experience depression during this period. We don't know so much about men. We think between 5 and 10% of men experience perinatal mental illness, but it's a subject which isn't so well researched, so we have a lot less certainty about those figures. And in 2014, the London School of Economics published a report showing that the cost to the UK of perinatal mental illness was around £8 billion a year. So there's lots of reasons for doing something about it. And postnatal depression is probably one of the best known of these mental health problems, but there's all sorts of different problems that can affect people around childbirth. And we're going to talk about lots of them in this session today. We're going to talk about a range of problems, but anything from anxiety to psychosis can affect people around childbirth. So if you have any questions, please ask them on Slido. You've got the details there to do that, and we'll be looking at them on our monitor as we go through. We hopefully will have about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of this session where we can answer your questions. And you know the hashtag already. This can happen 2019. If you've got comments, if you're overawed by the things that we say, please do take some pictures and share them on Twitter as well. Okay, so our first speaker is Kelly Leslie. And Kelly, please introduce yourself.
Sure.
Tell us about your lived experience of postnatal depression, and also tell us a bit about what you do now in your work to support staff who are going through similar problems.
Yeah, so I'm Senior HR Manager at Farrer & Co, and we're a law firm in central London. So professionally, I'm the wellbeing lead for the firm. I do other things, but that's part of my role. And I've had years of supporting other women return to the workplace, so within my HR capacity as an employer. And I will touch on that, of course, because it's so important that we talk about what it means in the workplace. But I'll start with my personal story, which is that I had my first child 8 years ago, and I was always a high achiever, straight A's at school. And I say that because I'm one of those people whose identity is tied up within their profession, and I think that's really important when you go on to experience mental health. And really wanted a child and came home with my baby. I did have a difficult pregnancy and delivery, but I'm not going to spend time on that today. But I did, and then I came home, and after 5 days of giving birth, the world just became a very strange place. And I felt like I wasn't in the room. I felt like I was floating, like I was looking down from above. Nothing seemed real. I remember that it was when Prince William married Kate, but it felt like it was a cartoon, like they weren't really. I think that resonates because of timing. We had our children at the same time, and I couldn't accept that they were getting married. I felt like I'd left the world. I tried to chew food and I couldn't swallow. I tried to sleep and the adrenaline was just rushing down my arms. I became restless and agitated. I couldn't even sit on a sofa. I couldn't keep still for long enough. My vision became blurred. I thought I was losing my eyesight, so I visited the optician. But most scary of all, this pink teddy bear, which actually makes me laugh that I still had a teddy bear at that age, but that's the reality. I must have had my own teddy still. No shame in that. And I had a vision of putting this pink teddy bear over the face of my baby, this really wanted baby. And it got worse and worse to the point where I locked myself in the bedroom and I thought I was going to kill my baby. It takes a lot to be able to say that now, but I can 8 years on. I thought I was going to kill my own baby. And I had visions of becoming the next Mail Online news item and Kelly Leslie, of Frederick's Place. And so I was absolutely petrified. And I couldn't even get dressed by then. I think I went to Sainsbury's wearing my pyjamas. I don't even remember doing that, but my mum tells me that I did. So I asked a couple of friends to come to the house. My husband had returned to work by then, and I asked one to stay with my son, and the other one came with me to the GP, and I said, I'm scared I'm going to kill my own baby. I'm in your hands. I'm petrified. Please help me. And thankfully, I was in the hands of the right GP, and a crisis team came to our house within 24 hours, and I was assessed. And then I was admitted voluntarily into a mother and baby unit, which is a special form of mental health unit which provides care and support for women and their babies. And so I lived there in a mental health unit for 3 months without my husband. Couldn't look after my baby for a lot of the time. But they keep you with your baby and they try and help you build a bond with your baby, who, let me add, I felt absolutely nothing for. All I ever wanted was to become a mother. Felt absolutely nothing. Didn't want to be around him. And they help you bond with your baby and care for your baby. And then eventually I became just about well enough to... I was so scared. I used to Google halfway houses because I thought I'd never be able to look after myself. I said to my mum, can I live with you? Will you look after me, mum? And will you look after my children? Because I genuinely believed I would never function as an adult again. I can't stress that enough. Anyway, I would beg them for ECT as well. I said the antidepressants aren't working. But I came home and I did recover. It is a positive story. I did get better. And I returned to work. And it was a really slow journey. And then it took many years to decide whether to have another child. For a long time, I said that I never would. And eventually, I felt able to. And I had another child. And 5 days after delivery, became just as ill again. For me, the fall in hormones, what a lot of people aren't aware of is when you're pregnant, your hormones are at something like 30 times their normal level. And suddenly, 5 days after delivery, they just drop. And in some women, that will trigger an episode of clinical depression, which is what happens with me. So no more children for me. That's a personal choice, but I do have two. And I did return again to work. And I'll just talk for a couple of minutes about that, because that's why we're here, to understand what that means to support others when they're returning to the workplace. And all sorts of things helped, but I'll just draw out a few. My manager came to see me in the mother and baby unit. I'm not suggesting you'll always be able to do that for your staff. We had a particularly close relationship, but it made all the difference, because I felt so disconnected from the world, and that included the workplace. And so just for her to be there with me in a non-judgmental way and remind me of who I was before becoming ill. And when I returned, I saw an occupational health doctor, and actually I had a fairly negative experience with a gentleman. And it may have just been lack of rapport on the day, but bear in mind, for me, my illness was rooted in hormones. I'd had a female treating psychiatrist in the unit. So what we decided as a HR team, because bear in mind I work in HR, is from then on we would always have a female doctor on the books in terms of occupational health, so that we could give people that opportunity. So once I saw the right person, that was really, really helpful. And also they gave me time. I felt like I'd been robbed of the time with my baby. And so I asked to have an extended period beyond maternity leave. We don't call it that now, but it was called that then, so that I could have some extra time with Jack. And a phased return, so not being rushed back into the workplace. But the other thing I think my manager did really well is she respected me. You feel like you lose so much of yourself when you become ill. And, of course, I've heard a lot today about the importance of workplace interventions and support, and there's a role for that. But gradually, as you become stronger and you get your identity back, what you want to then feel is empowered, because you've lost yourself and you're finding yourself again. And at that point, you want to be listened to and feel that you have agency in deciding how you will return, and to build up that credibility again in the workplace. And I felt like my manager did that. She didn't patronise me. She just listened. So it's been a very successful return, thankfully, and it's a really positive story. But as a HR professional, I've learned an awful lot about how we can support women. I felt like I understood mental health and postnatal illness before I became ill. I'd even supported a mother, but boy, when I got ill, I realised I didn't know very much.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think you show such strength in being able to tell that story so clearly. It's a big deal. I've shared my own mental illness a few times in front of audiences, and that was amazing. Thank you. Erika Fitzgerald is our next speaker. She has a very different story, a very traumatic experience of becoming a mother, and also, like Kelly, has responded in a really positive way, a really creative way to help other mothers in the workplace. So yeah, Erika, please share with us.
Thank you. So yeah, my experience is the opposite. So instead of postnatal depression, it was post-traumatic stress disorder, panic attacks and anxiety. So I had a very healthy pregnancy, everything was fine, did the NCT, where they tell you that babies come very easily, water birth, everything is beautiful. And then you ask, what about C-sections? Oh, no, we don't talk about that. We don't need to talk about that. You don't need to learn about that. Well, out of 5, 6 in our group, how many? 6? 4 of us were cesareans. 3 of us were emergency, unfortunately, but it happened. So I was overdue. And I went to have a scan, and they found out I had no amniotic fluid anymore. So I immediately had to stay and was induced, and it was horrible. It was a horrible experience, but that's okay, it happens. Eventually, they took me to an emergency cesarean, 4 o'clock in the morning, and I had a respiratory arrest. So apparently I had something that is 1 in a million or 1 in a billion. It's something very, very rare, where the amniotic fluid went to my lungs. So I had a respiratory arrest, and I could feel I was really anxious, and I was really tense going to the theatre. And I remember telling the doctor, I'm not feeling okay. She says, don't worry, you're just a bit nervous, it's okay. And what's the team? What team is your son? Is it a boy or a girl? Was it a boy, or what team is it going to support? And I said, look, honestly, I'm not okay. There's something wrong with me. And I just looked to the anesthetist, and I said, can you save this baby? And that was it. I saw him being pushed away and a mask coming, and they said 3, 2. That was it. So I woke up in the ICU 12 hours later, I think, something like that. Was in the ICU because apparently not only I had a respiratory arrest, but I lost 3/4 of blood because my womb wouldn't stop contracting because of the amount of hours I had stayed being induced and everything. When I found out everything that happened, in ICU I was okay, so it took me a couple of days to meet my son. There was plenty of things that happened. I can chat with you later about that. But when I found out everything that happened, when I was told, that's when the anxiety and the panic attacks kicked in. And I started having panic attacks in the hospital. It might be related that when I was in the ICU, there was also a man in there. Because in the ICU, unfortunately, at that time, there was most people that were with me there were dying, basically dying, like older people in like horrible conditions. And I was kind of healthy because after I woke up after 12 hours, and this is something that the doctors couldn't explain, how come I was so well, went really down and woke up 12 hours later like, fine, what am I doing here? Can I go out? Can I see my baby? Can I be with my family? And they didn't allow the baby to come in. I couldn't get out, and it was all these issues. But there was a man there, and he removed all his cables in the middle of the night and escaped from the ICU, and there was the police and the alarms and everything. And I was the only, obviously, healthy one watching everything. Maybe this helped as well, I don't know. It was awful, so it was awful, and I feel like Kelly that I was robbed the time with the baby. And the first couple of months, like going back home and having the panic attacks, I didn't understand what was going on with me, and all these thoughts coming to my mind. Opposite to her, I didn't think I was going to kill the baby. I thought I was going to die. And constantly in my mind, it was like, I'm going to die. I'm not okay. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. And this kept playing in my mind. So I just brought this. This was my diary. I was told to have a diary, and you can see the post-its here with everything that I've spoken about before. But luckily, I made a list of the most important, the thoughts that used to go into my mind. So I used to say, I'm not okay and I'm going to die, and I was certain of that there was something wrong with me. When will I be normal again? Because for me, I was abnormal. Something was wrong, and I couldn't understand what was wrong with me. What's going on with me? The fear of the hospital. I had a complete fear of thinking of going into a hospital again. My dad was ill at that time. I'm the oldest. I'm the one that supports and helps him. And I was like, how am I going to go into a hospital with my dad? There's no way I can face a hospital. I used to look at pregnant women and say, oh my gosh, they don't know what they're doing to themselves. You know, as if it's the worst thing ever is for you to have a child. What's the best therapy for me? Will I be depressed, anxious, or scared again? And that was through the months. What happened to that strong woman that I used to be? Do I have to live with these feelings and symptoms for the rest of my life? I'm not as strong as I used to be. I'm vulnerable. I'm scared. The fear of fear, that's what I had. It was the fear of fear. So it was the constant fear and the anxiety and those thoughts. And I remember, you know, Chris was trying to take me to places, and the whole time that thing was living inside of me. And until eventually we took our son to a pediatrician, and he recommended me to someone that's actually sitting in the audience today. So Carol, can you just, yeah, there you go. So I would say that woman saved my life. And that's when I started doing the trauma therapy, the EMDR, which really, really helped me. And that's when everything kind of slowly, you know, that darkness, I started getting out of that darkness and realizing that actually there is a light, you know, at the end of the tunnel, and I'm going to get better. And I started talking to people. And then just the fact of knowing that other people had gone through the same was amazing, because I felt normal. I felt that actually, you know, she's been through it and she survived and she's well, and other people had been through it, and other moms and other friends. And it's like, you know, when you have a miscarriage, people don't like talking about it. But then it's amazing the amount of us, maybe in the room here, that we've had a miscarriage. I had one between the two pregnancies. And I mean, thanks to the therapy and thanks to this support and just being open and talking to other people, is that we then managed to, you know, have a second child. At that time, unfortunately, I didn't get any support from work. And I think what I learned from that was that I became really passionate about building networks and building communities and helping and volunteering. So I started by going to hospitals and talking to other people about it. And so eventually, when I moved jobs, I'm one of the founding creators of the family network that we have, and also the Mothers Forum, which is helping, supporting people so they can talk about anything, about all sorts. And not only mothers, but fathers, which is why my husband is here today, because it's mainly a lot of men go through it. And I remember after a couple of years, I was fine, because I had the therapy, I talked about it, and I came to him one day and I said, oh, what do you think? You know, why shouldn't we give Alex the chance to have a sibling? And he said, there's no way I would ever have a child again. And I think now I'll pass it to him, because then the story continues.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so my name's Chris. I'm head of client management for a financial technology company. And yeah, I guess I take the baton and move on. So my part in the run-up to Alex being born was probably the same as most prospective fathers. You kind of sidelined a little bit. You're an associate and a bag carrier, and that's your role. And I guess going into the experience in hospital, that was still the traditional way until the time when things weren't going well. Because at the point when she can't remember when she went under, that was when I was pushed out of a room by a bunch of guys in masks into, I think, a ward. I don't know, I think it was the afterbirth ward. And as I went in, they offered me a cup of tea and told me to sit down. It was fine. And as I was walking out, I saw a crash team running the other direction into the ward, which was basically to resuscitate. So I waited in the ward. The doors were closed. I could hear all this noise going on in the room. And then I heard crying. So I knew that a baby had been born. He sounded pretty healthy, from the sound of it anyway. And then after about 45 minutes, he was wheeled into where I was, naked, purple, cold, screaming in a plastic tray. And they went, "Congratulations, you're a father." And then they immediately ran out to go and help again. So they offered me another cup of tea. And I asked them if they had a nappy and a blanket. And then that was it. So for about the next 12 hours, whilst Erika was in ICU, either unconscious, semi-conscious, or being looked after, Alex was pretty much, well, was my responsibility. He was taken straight away into an incubator unit because when a child's born, the legal owner or the legal carer or the parent is the mother. And so if the mother's not able to be there responsive to sign the paperwork, then the child is motherless or parentless at that point. So I didn't really have any say in what could happen to him. I could stay with him, but other than that, we had to sort of wait until such time, or actually fight until such time as he was allowed to go and see Erika and spend time with her. And so all said and done, we were in hospital for
A week.
a week.
Total, yeah.
It felt like longer. And that was pretty much half of my paternity leave already done, was spent in hospital before we'd even gone home. My employer at the time, I mean, was great. My manager was superb. He basically said, look, you've got your 2 weeks, and then I think his exact words were, now just stay at home and look after them until you need to come back. So it was about a month that I was off, all said and done in the end, which was great. But it wasn't the month that I was expecting. And I think from a male perspective, and most of it's going to be from a male perspective because, the underlying themes that we've spoken about before is that self-awareness for men is pretty poor. You don't know something's wrong until it becomes apparent that something's wrong. You don't know how to go and get help for it because you don't think anything's wrong. And we also tend to, depending on your background, knuckle down, just get on with it. I think that's what I did, because I just knuckled down and got on with it. And I think as part of that, there was the feeling that I had to knuckle down and get on with it, because obviously Erika was not okay. But really, she's the most important one, or the baby's the most important, and her. And actually, of all of that, I'm probably the least important one. I need to get on with it and don't deserve to have to, either suffer or have trouble or anything else. I'm the one who needs to sort of be there to support and everything else. And so that's why I got into that maintenance phase for probably about 18 months or so. And I think you can lump a lot of things underneath the new father experience, so lack of sleep, stress, worry, frustration because you don't know what you're doing. Luckily, by that stage, I was pretty adept at changing a nappy because I virtually had to do it from scratch. It was nothing like NCT taught me. It was like, it's okay, it's fine now. Stop crying. And so I was okay at that. But I think you just go into this self-preservation or family preservation phase where you need to get on with everyday life and be the strong one until such time as it was apparent that that wasn't the case. And, we said postnatal depression, of course, very much a female experience. PTSD is a cross-gender experience. And it's funny that it's only until I got asked to come and do this that I was actually able to put a label on it and go, do you know, actually, yeah, that's what it was. That's what it is. It's post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think the awareness is that for men, we were talking about this beforehand, André, that, post-traumatic stress disorder has been associated with men for many, many decades now because of servicemen. And I think it's first brought to the fore in Vietnam. So 50-odd years ago, we knew that post-traumatic stress disorder affected men. But it's really attracting it, or putting it into the right situation because, combat situations, traumatic life death situations, whatever it is, we know about that. What we don't know about is when you're witnessing a life-changing incident or someone near you is, having a near-death experience. And I think fatherhood gets lumped into a category of fatherhood. And if anything is outside of normal in that, then there's not really the awareness or the self-awareness that you should be focusing on yourself because things may not be all right with you. And I think it was definitely the case after about 2 years when things were just not right with me. And I can't put a name on it, just things were not right with me. I was sort of angry. I'd been through the whole recrimination and guilt and should I have done more? Should I have been there? I should have been the one that I should have saved her and it should never have gotten to this. So you go through all of that, which is probably symptomatic of the disorder as well. Fear, I'm hypersensitive about, even now, and I say I am hypersensitive about the children's health. Checking them every couple of hours to make sure they're still breathing. And also myself as well. I don't think I've visited a doctor or a GP as many times in 4 years in the previous 40 years to have this, that, and the other. Anything that came up that was checked, like, I'm going to die, I've got this, I've got that. And obviously you go to the doctor and it's all okay. But all of this put together means that at some point one day, you realise that something's not right with you and this is not me. And I'm pretty self-aware. 10 years of working in the fitness industry, I was okay. I knew myself. I'd done mental health. I'd done sports psychology. I knew how to diagnose it in other people, but I couldn't see it in myself because it's progressive and it's ongoing and it's day by day. And at that point, I had to put the brakes on. And luckily, Carol was there for me as well. And my intervention with Carol was more of an awakening or an awareness thing where she just gave me tools to be able to see what I probably already knew and to give me that self-control back again and that self-awareness back again and give me the ability that as and when we went through the years towards George and the second child, I was able to self-treat or self-administer the tools that she'd taught me to be able to bring us to the point where we could do that. And then even with that birth, which was relatively straightforward, it's like it was really a walk in the park, honestly. Again, when Erika was sort of recovering from that, and I kind of noticed that he wasn't breathing perhaps normally because I was hypersensitive. Then they realised he had fluid in his lungs, and then I spent the next 7 hours in the incubation unit with him. So the funny thing is, if you call it funny, is that throughout the experience which led to my episode was all based around Erika's experience. Actually, what I then had to deal with was my worst nightmare, which was his experience, which all had been, is he okay? And I was in a place where, unfortunately, lots of little babies in there probably weren't going to be okay. And I'd spend seven hours in there with him. So that was challenging. And so I had to go back into myself and sort of bring out, again, the tools and the strength that Carol has shown me. And it's an ongoing process. I think it's not an episode that you get out of. It's something that you're continually growing through. And
you learn how to, stop it. So you learn how to stop getting into a panic attack.
Yeah, even now I'm super sensitive about the boy's health. There's certain things that will trigger, some degree of sort of unnatural paranoia about them and the fear that I have that, either I'm going to get something, a serious disease or die or something, or they're going to get something, or they're going to get kidnapped, or they're going to get this, they're going to get that. Even with George, he's around about the age when, everyone remembers what happened to James Bulger. When that anniversary came up, that really hit me. And I spent a long time in sort of, several weeks having to deal with that and thinking about that in a way I'd never thought before. And so that I was able to identify as being, okay, well, this is another potential, the episode is bubbling up again, do something about it. And so, I think putting into context of, sitting between two very, very brave individuals who have suffered 100 times more than I have, I think my message would be that, I didn't get any help from my employer because I never asked for it. The reason I never asked for it was because I didn't know anything was wrong. The reason I didn't know anything was wrong was because I wasn't aware that could be wrong with you. And I think that what I would want to take, get people to take out of this and be able to help with going forward is just make men, fathers, dads, everyone understand that, I'm probably not the only one in the room who's had this experience or is having this experience to some certain degree or other. I'm sure there's probably a number of people in here who could empathize with that, that we're not alone. And really the message has to go out there that men have to become better at coming forward to ask for help or at least just talk to each other that they're not feeling okay, because that's when you can really start helping and bring, the good things out and the ball starts rolling. But until you can identify that, nothing's really going to, you're stuck in a world of pain yourself.
Yeah. Amen to that. Thank you both for sharing your story. That was amazing as well. Yeah, thank you. It really strikes me that in this world that we live in, this 21st century parenting idea that we all have, which is kind of fueled by Instagram and all that nonsense, is very different from what actually happens in the real world. And obviously it is amazing and beautiful, and I love my 3 kids more than anything, but the experience that we've had shows you that a normal experience can be filled with all sorts of fears and anxieties and traumatic stress and depression. That is the norm for many of us. So I guess the question that's on everyone's lips is, what can employers do to make it easier for people? I'm going to skip through all the other questions, and let's focus on that in the time we've got left. Kelly, do you want to start off with some ideas, some recommendations that these people can implement when they go back?
Yeah, well, firstly, I'll make one practical point, just listening to Chris, and we talked about it earlier, which is also where it's a mother who's unwell. Of course, the impact on the husband or the partner should not be underestimated. So even on a practical level, if you're offering support as an employer to a mother, have dad in mind as well. It's not necessarily a responsibility, but most employers take these things seriously. And so because I was in a hospital, my husband was offered counselling weekly, as was I. But of course, that wouldn't normally be the case. So that's just a practical issue about bear dad in mind.
There's an amazing campaign on social media by a guy called Mark Williams called How Are You Dad? Really simple hashtag. And he basically says, let's get all health professionals asking that as well, because we don't currently. And actually, as Chris has said, many men are really terrible at recognising that this isn't just stress or tiredness, this is actually an illness.
And also for a dad whose wife has become unwell, your wife is disappearing in front of your very eyes, and don't underestimate the impact of that. My husband lost his wife. I mean, he's lost her twice, but this person who you've got the shared responsibility for a child, which is one of the biggest undertakings anyway, and now your partner in crime has disappeared in front of your very eyes. So there's think of dad, but other practical steps. Bear in mind the role of private medical insurance. So I was particularly fortunate, got to find these positives, that our private medical also allowed some kind of cashback scheme for every night spent in an NHS hospital, which actually amounted to about £4,000 for me, which at the time meant nothing, because when you're that ill, money will not help you. But when I then had that period where I wanted some extra time off because I felt I'd been robbed of time with my baby, it meant that I was able to do that and be home for longer. So that's on a practical level. And also I experienced various other health issues, not dissimilarly, and thought I was dying and had to see neurologists and all sorts. But the private medical allowed me to do that. So on a practical level, you can be there with that information. And also because the illness, depression, anxiety in general, is so debilitating, simple things like, are we Aviva, are we Bupa, what's the membership? I couldn't do things like that. I was overwhelmed. I couldn't remember what to take to the shower. Shower gel, shampoo, I couldn't remember that. So how would I possibly access private medical insurance? So you can be a source of knowledge and practical support in that regard. And another important one is charity. So there are some really good charities out there who specialise in support for postnatal illness. And for me, that was my lifeline. When I came out of the unit, really, the hard part had only just begun, and I accessed Heart's postnatal illness support. And I was able to talk to a mother who had been through it, and listening to her say, Kelly, everything you're telling me, I promise you I went through the same, and I promise you I recovered, was my lifeline. And so wherever your offices are, on a practical level, find out which charities offer support. And there's the Association for Postnatal Illness, and their headquarters is in London. And actually then lots of people don't know about them. And you can phone them, something like between 10 and 2, any day of the week for free. And someone will be there on the other end of the line to offer you reassurance and practical support. So signpost that within your workplace.
Great, thank you. Erika, do you want to give us some
Yeah,
ideas?
I'll say, totally agree, totally, especially the medical insurance one's amazing. I think one thing that's very important is how HR communicates with the employee, because there's that huge gap, and people's like, oh yeah, she had the baby, congratulations, blah, blah, blah. And not everyone is open. Not everyone will go and say, I need help, I nearly died, can we talk about it? It's shocking, it is shocking, or I'm mentally ill. I mean, people won't talk about it. It took me a long time, to kind of say, okay, fine, I'm going to make this public because that's the only way to help others. it's really hard. So sometimes even the way that HR approaches people and say, you know, oh, can you tell us something that went right or wrong? Or, you know, there's different ways of kind of trying to approach people in a different way that will maybe talk about it. One thing that I noticed with the family network that we started in the bank is that people won't tell anything to HR, but they will come to me or to other members of the team, and they will tell me all sorts of stories. And some stories is like, my gosh, we need to do something about it, but I'm not capable. I'm not HR. I actually work in trading with men. There's only men in my team. I'm surrounded by men. So I'm kind of the mom of the team. And I got this, you know, very close relationship with I&D now, with HR. And then we worked out that we have one person as a family support person. And they can have kind of 15 minutes, you know, confidential chats with HR, because that's when I say, look, they will be able to support you. The other thing that I find very important is managers have to be trained, because we still have this thing, especially in banking and finance, this very male-orientated environment. And when managers, they become managers just because they were probably top salesperson or something like that, not really because they know how to manage people. And I think managers need to understand how important this is. I mean, there was a talk earlier today, and one of the questions was, how can we make managers that don't get it? You know, and I thought that was amazing, because that's really important. So managers should be trained. Mental health, you know, we should talk about it in general. But when it comes to situations, I mean, it's already very, very hard to have a child. You go through everything, you know. But it's important for us to know that things can go wrong, and a little bit of support and help changes everything.
I wonder what you all thought about the kind of day-to-day practical logistics of supporting somebody back into work. So this question has come up about easing new parents back into their roles. Have you got any thoughts about how companies can do that?
I think from a male perspective, it's even simpler than maybe, you know, what's been said so far is just acknowledging the fact that, you know, as you said, there's two parents, both of them have been through an experience, and I think it can be quite a shock. It's a physical and a mental shock to go from being at home with a newborn and everything that comes in and building your nest to then being back out into the real world, in some cases 2 weeks later. I mean, we're getting better as a country at that in terms of paternity leave. I believe that has to change. But then also when you do go back in as well, that it's not business as usual. You know, there needs to be some kind of re-entry interview, some kind of, you know, even an "are you okay?" or, you know, a cup of coffee. And as I said, what became apparent to me, the more years we went, you know, we go down the track, is the amount of men and fathers who've been through this kind of experience and are continually going through it. I can see a question's come up on there, you know, about that. There is such a large community of men out there who've experienced this, because it's not an uncommon episode, that I feel someone, be it an employer, a manager, or whoever, needs to take hold of that, champion it, and actually publicise it within the environment. And look, it's going to be the challenge for all mental health awareness and matters when men are concerned, which is you're breaking a mould, especially in finance, especially in law, where men are just brought up in a certain way not to come forward, and it's a sign of weakness if you do. And it keeps coming up again and again and again as a big, you know, a barrier to men being involved or getting the benefit of it. But it so is still. And I think if we can break down that barrier at that level and now understand that there is potentially a problem and just bring men back in. You know, I can think of someone at work who I need to get through to, because I know he's got a story to tell, and it's been several weeks after he came back. I know he's got a story to tell. He's not necessarily forthcoming with it. I need to find the way in to be able to just grab a cup of coffee with him and say, how are things going? You know, how's the little one? And just start talking. I
think we certainly need services that are targeted and that are tailored. And speaking about men with mental health problems, that's very clear. I think we also need to think about other people from other, you know, backgrounds. We haven't spoken at all about same-sex couples. I'm very conscious that we've got a white heterosexual panel here talking about this. We also need to think about people from all sorts of backgrounds. Kelly, I'm going to give you the final word. What do you think in terms of helping an individual who's really struggled for potentially many months? easing them back into work? What would be your recommendation?
There's a few things, but quick ones. One is to make the use of keep in touch days or otherwise to maintain communication. I know it's really difficult, and I know as a HR professional, when someone says they're pregnant, a manager goes, there's so much legislation, and what am I allowed to ask them or not ask them? But actually, there's a real danger in just not maintaining the relationship and the contact. And if you become unwell, you're feeling really alienated. And it's alienating anyway. You think it's the one time in life where you don't have the structure of going to work. When else, really, in your lifetime, do you lose the structure of getting up, showering, and going to work? So they're alienated. So keep in contact. Have a strong relationship. But if you're HR, make sure the line managers have a relationship. That's why my manager was able to support me, because we had the mutual trust and confidence. Make sure that when they return to their team, you're actually sitting down and having a meeting with them. It's not, oh, Sheila's back, great, let's move on. They've been out for a long time. It's significant. Spend time with them, reintegrate with them. If you're in a chargeable hours environment like a law firm, consider reducing targets for just a small window of time, so that you're acknowledging they won't be up to full speed. But most importantly, and that's been the message all day, don't judge, be compassionate, listen.
Yes.
And remember that if they're back to work and a doctor has signed off on them coming back to work, they're well enough to make decisions for themselves. So empower them and listen to them, and between you'll work out a way to help them be back and be successful.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone in the audience for coming and listening. Thank you to our panel.